Alright, what's up everybody? Alright, time to go through the Indo-Pakistani conflict. Alright, now the main area that we evaluated for this unit was the use of ground forces. Now the essential question for this unit is evaluate the effectiveness of the ground strategies employed by both sides throughout the varying Indo-Pakistani conflicts. Alright, first we're going to analyze the ground strategies of the first conflict, which was in 1947. Now the causes might be really interesting for this part, but as far as practices goes for ground forces, there really wasn't much going on in the first one. They were not really effective because there were new militaries and they had yet to adapt their fighting styles to fit mountain terrain. Pretty much the way I would describe the first Indo-Pakistani conflicts as far as ground forces are concerned, it was pretty much just two ineffective sides trying to meet each other, and once they met each other, they fired a couple bullets, but nothing really happened. This is why the battle over the Kashmir region just ended in a stalemate, because no side had a significant advantage in mountain fighting, so nothing really happened. Alright, now with the second conflict, they weren't really too effective, but they at least tried to change up their tactics. Now the Indian strategy involved throwing a massive amount of soldiers at Pakistan. They would also, unlike the first conflict, they would also expand the war by attacking other parts of Pakistan. This would try to divert the Pakistani army's attention away from the Kashmir region, because they were more likely to defend an actual populated area than to just fight over a mountainous region. Alright, continuing. Now, India, while they did expand the conflict, they didn't do it to the full extent because they didn't go for the capital. Well, but it did make a few gains. And in this war, more tanks were used because India was also launching attacks outside of the mountainous region. Now, this was a huge problem in the Kashmir region because the ground forces were just limited to infantry units, and considering they were using more World War II tactics, there wasn't much head-to-head combat, and thus nothing was really done. Alright, continuing. Alright, now a big difference in India. They felt like they were fighting a war for the people. So the Indian public did in fact aid the effort. Alright, now delving into the Pakistani conflict, which is pretty interesting. Let me just delete this bit. There you go. Alright, now the Pakistani strategy. First, they wanted to sneak Pakistani soldiers disguised as Kashmiris into Kashmir. Now, this was a direct example of Mao's tactics used during the Chinese Civil War, and this tactic would also be seen again during the Vietnam War during the Tet Offensive. But this was not as effective because the Kashmiri population Kashmiri population did not fully support the Pakistani liberators. Now, once they were in there, they were going to urge Kashmiri populations to take part in a war of liberations against Indians, destroy Indian establishments, and then send conventional forces to take the region once India's firepower was taken out. Now, why did this not work? The Kashmiris weren't too fond of the idea of joining the Pakistani government because it was very unstable at the time. Pretty much, the Kashmiris they kind of lived in a peaceful region, so they really didn't feel like it was necessary to go off and join Pakistan. And also, the locals they just reported the Pakistani infiltrators right away. Now this just made it very ineffective because they were just rooted out. Now this was kind of similar to the Pacific Theater because they because in this conflict the two sides were mainly fighting for superiority with mountain passes because those were the only usable parts of Kashmir. Just as in the Pacific Theater during World War II, the Japanese and the Americans were fighting over specific islands. Now, in this war, both sides used a bit more tank power, but air power was still limited, so thus the ground forces still played the key role in the conflict. And just like the first conflict, they were using conventional tactics of fight and unconventional terrain, so thus the war just ended in yet another stalemate. And the tanks were very ineffective because they were not well equipped to fight in high terrain, mountainous environments, and they lacked the proper support, and thus they just ended up being largely ineffective. Alright, now it's time for the third conflict. This is where things get a bit interesting. Alright, now this all started when there was civil unrest in East Pakistan. This was kind of an inevitable conflict eventually because religion was the only unifying factor between Pakistan and East Pakistan. Now Pakistan, they initially sent troops over to the east to crush the rebellion. Now India, in order to divide the nation, they decided to support the guerrilla fighters, and also they provided tactical support to make sure that Pakistan could not effectively fight They could not effectively fight a war outside their home turf. Now India, they employ their full force here by using a blitzkrieg style attack. Tanks and infantry units flowed over the border to liberate East Pakistan. Now India was motivated to fight on the Bangladesh behalf because they were taking in many refugees at the time, and it was cheaper to free Bangladesh and have the refugees go home rather than keep them in India. Now this is where the tactics get interesting. This is where there's a parallel between the 1965 conflict, because while the main conflict was taking place in East Pakistan, India employed tank battalions in the western region of Rajasthan to attack Pakistan and thus draw their forces away from the east in order to defend the main the main region of Pakistan. Now this desert assault was very similar to North Africa during World War II because you had tanks playing against each other in a very wide open desert landscape. Now this use of tank warfare was much more effective than the first two conflicts because they were not fighting in a mountain region, and so they had a much larger arena to play in, and they had much better visibility. Alright, continuing. Alright, Pakistan, they countered with tanks, and they also sent troops up to Kashmir to try to draw attention away from East Pakistan and the Pakistan-Indian border. Now because they were using conventional tactics in in the Rajasthan region, they lost a lot of armor because it was pretty much just tank columns going head to head. Yeah, so Pakistan, they used their terrain to build a defensive perimeter, and that's kind of a way that they use their natural surroundings to defend their country. Now going back to the east, one way that Pakistan tried to create a defensive perimeter was to collapse the bridges that provided entrance into Bangladesh. Alright, continuing. But the Indian forces directly countered this by employing bridge building platoons, which were pretty effective because it eliminated Pakistan's hope for a defensive perimeter in the east. And also, now this might not necessarily be ground tactics, but India employed their navy. Now, India employed their navy to fight in the east, and they isolated the Bay of Bengal so Pakistan could not send more troops over to their main battlegrounds. Alright. So, in conclusion, during the third conflict, while Bangladesh was the main fighting ground, both forces used conventional tactics to draw each other away from that theater, and India ultimately won because they were able to employ better fighting tactics and isolate the Pakistani forces away from their home base. Alright, now just perform this formative activity. Just go through the readings, and yep, that's about it.